Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. Tonight, you don't need to solve anything or hold anything up. You only need to arrive. Let your shoulders soften into the mattress. Let your jaw unclench. Let the muscles around your eyes loosen as if they've been carrying a small weight all day. If there's a light nearby, imagine it dimming to a quiet glow, like a lamp behind a curtain. The room becomes simple again. Fabric, air, a gentle hush. Take one slow breath in and let it go out as if you're fogging a window. Another, a little deeper, and as you exhale, imagine the day sliding off you the way water slides off a smooth stone. You are safe enough to rest. You are allowed to be unfinished. The world can keep turning without your supervision for a while. Outside your window, whether you can see it or not, the night sky is doing what it has always done. It turns slowly, patiently, with no urgency. Stars hold their positions like steady thoughts, and the darker spaces between them feel wide and forgiving. Somewhere, streets are quieting, kitchens are going dark, late trains are thinning out, and a soft, ordinary stillness is spreading across the planet, one neighborhood at a time. Tonight, we'll travel into that wide darkness in the calmest way possible. Not with speed, not with noise, but with the gentlest kind of distance. The kind that makes your worries shrink without you having to fight them. There is a photograph that does this, a single frame that makes the world feel both precious and light in your hands. In it, Earth is not a globe, not a map, not even a familiar sphere with clouds curling over oceans. It is a tiny point, pale, bluish, almost shy, resting inside a sunlit haze. So small it seems impossible that anything could live there, that laughter and cities and bedtime stories could fit inside it. And yet, it's home. So tonight, we'll follow that photograph back to its quiet origin. We'll drift alongside a small, tireless spacecraft far beyond the planets, where sunlight is faint and radio messages take hours to cross the emptiness. Imagine it out there like a slow-moving bottle in a cosmic sea, metal and wiring, a steady antenna, and a warm core of electricity rationed carefully for the long journey. No sound reaches it, no wind touches it, only light and time. Inside it, memories are stored in patterns, images, readings, tiny measurements of a vast place. And tucked into its story is a human gesture, almost poetic. The idea that if you travel far enough away, you might turn around and take one last look, not to say goodbye, but to remember what matters. We'll listen to the careful minds who planned that look backward, and we'll let the meaning of that tiny dot settle over us like a warm blanket. The world slows, and so do we. To understand the pale blue dot, it helps to imagine leaving Earth the way you leave a busy room, without slamming the door, without announcing yourself, just slipping out into a hallway where the sound fades behind you. First, there is the familiar neighborhood of our sky, the moon, close enough to feel like a companion. Then the bright inner planets, where sunlight is sharp and strong, and beyond them, the long stretch of space where orbits widen and the warmth of the sun thins into something more delicate. In that widening darkness, there are places where the idea of far starts to change, not as a sprint, but as a long, patient drift. In the late 20th century, 2 spacecraft were sent outward on that kind of drift. They were built to keep going past the giant planets, past the last easy landmarks, and into the quiet outskirts of the solar system. They carried cameras and instruments, antennas and tape recorders, small thrusters for tiny course corrections. And they carried, too, a human desire that is older than rockets, the desire to know what lies beyond the next horizon. Along the way, the spacecraft borrowed energy from the planets themselves. It passed close to Jupiter, then Saturn, and the gravity of those worlds bent its path and quickened its pace like a careful slingshot. You can picture it as a silent dance, a small visitor gliding past a great banded sphere, then being gently thrown onward into deeper dark. Every maneuver was planned with quiet precision, as if someone were arranging steps in a slow waltz. Except the ballroom was the solar system. When a spacecraft travels that far, everything becomes slower and more careful. Commands are not shouted. They are whispered across space, folded into radio waves, and delivered after long hours of waiting. A tiny adjustment can take days of planning and days more of confirmation. A photograph is not a click of a button. It is a choreography of angles, exposure, and timing, like holding your breath at exactly the right moment. And as the spacecraft moves outward, the light changes. The sun becomes less like a blazing presence and more like a bright star among other stars. Shadows soften. The deep background grows thick with distant points. Planets that once filled the frame become small disks, and then points, and then names on a chart. Eventually, even Earth, the place we measure everything from, becomes hard to pick out. It's a strange kind of comfort, this widening perspective, because in your day-to-day life, the mind tends to live close to the ground, close to errands, messages, worries, schedules, but distance invites a different attention, a slower attention. Out there, nothing rushes. Motion is steady. Time feels broad. Tonight, we drift into that distance gently, letting scale do its quiet work on the mind, letting the universe remind you, without words, that you can loosen your grip and be held by something larger. Far from the noise of launch pads and countdown clocks, the pale blue dot began in a quieter place, in the steady imagination of someone who believed that perspective could be a kind of kindness. Picture an office late in the evening, papers stacked neatly, a few books open, the soft scratch of a pen. Outside, a campus is settling into night, and inside, one person is thinking about the long arc of a mission that has already done what it set out to do. The spacecraft has passed the great planets, sent back its discoveries, and now it is coasting onward. still alive, still listening, still traveling into the dark. The person is Carl Sagan, a scientist who loved planets, but also loved people. He understood that facts can be warm when they're offered gently, and that a scientific idea, explained with care, can quiet a mind instead of stirring it up. He spoke about the cosmos the way some people speak about music, with reverence, with clarity, and with the calm confidence that wonder is something we're allowed to feel. And then comes a simple suggestion, almost tender in its simplicity. Before the cameras are turned off to save power, why not turn them back one last time? Not to look for new worlds, but to look at the world we came from. It isn't an easy request. Pointing a camera anywhere near the sun is risky. Sunlight can flare inside the lens and scatter into bright streaks. The spacecraft is far away. Its power is limited, and the time of the deep space network is precious. Every image is a decision, a small sacrifice of resources in exchange for one more piece of meaning. But meaning matters. So engineers and scientists begin to plan. They calculate where each planet will appear. They choose exposure times carefully. Because space is not forgiving to a camera, they design a sequence step by step, as deliberately as laying stones in a path you can't walk yourself. The spacecraft must rotate, pause, expose, store, rotate again, all while holding its balance like a slow-spinning compass needle. Somewhere in the planning, there is an awareness that this is not just science. It is a message to the future, a reminder that our arguments and achievements, our pride and panic, are taking place on a world small enough to fit inside a single pixel. And when you think about it like that, the request feels less like a technical command and more like a bedtime thought, the kind that gently rearranges your priorities before sleep, not by scolding you, but by offering you an image so honest, so quietly vast, that the heart naturally softens. One last look back, not to prove anything, not to win an argument, but simply to remember what we share. And tonight, as you settle deeper into the pillow, we'll borrow that same gentle intention to look outward, then back again, and to let perspective become a kind of rest. On February 14th, 1990, while many people on Earth moved through an ordinary day, a camera far beyond the planets opened its eye for a moment and looked homeward. By then, Voyager 1 was unimaginably distant, about 40 astronomical units away, roughly 6 billion kilometers from the inner warmth of home. Out there, the solar system feels less like a set of familiar worlds and more like a thin, graceful arrangement of lights hanging in dark space. Sunlight still reaches you, but it is weaker, more delicate, like a far lamp in a long hallway. The plan that day was called a family portrait, a sequence of images of the sun and its planets taken from the edge of our neighborhood. You can imagine the spacecraft turning slowly, stopping, aiming, exposing, then turning again, like a careful person taking photographs in a quiet museum where you must not rush. And among those images was the one that would become famous, not because it was sharp or colorful or detailed, but because of what it reduced. To capture Earth, the camera had to point close to the sun. Light flooded the optics and broke into pale bands like sunbeams caught in dust. The result is gentle and strange. Vertical rays spilling across the darkness, a soft glare that makes the image feel almost dreamlike. It is not a flaw, so much as a reminder. Even our instruments reaching outward must still look through light. And there, tucked inside one of those rays, is Earth. Not a sphere with continents you can name, not a place with borders or headlines, just a speck, smaller than a pixel, a faint bluish-white point, barely there, almost easy to miss. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you might scan right past it. The exposure was taken in the early hours of that day in Greenwich time, and the data did not arrive in a dramatic instant. It was stored, held, protected, and then returned slowly, frame by frame. For months, the spacecraft sent back its images across the emptiness, while other missions and other priorities shared the listening time of the great antennas on Earth. Even the act of receiving a picture from that distance required patience, the kind of patience that feels almost like meditation. And while the signal crossed space, Earth kept turning, quietly unaware. Oceans moving, clouds rearranging themselves, night falling on one side as morning rose on the other. The whole world continuing to be itself, held inside a single, pale point of light. After the portrait, the cameras would soon be powered down, their work mostly complete, so that the spacecraft could save energy for the instruments that still mattered on the long journey. It's a quiet detail, but comforting. The photo was not taken with endless resources, but with careful trade-offs, as if the mission itself understood thrift and stillness. One last image, and then the eye closed, and the voyage continued. If you hold the pale blue dot in your mind for a little while, something subtle happens. The mind, which loves to zoom in, begins to zoom out. From where you are now, in bed, life can feel close up. The texture of a worry, the sharp edge of a decision, the little loop of a thought that won't stop replaying. But from that distant camera, all of it is gathered into the same tiny light. Every street lamp and shoreline, every birthday candle, every library book, every quiet apology, every new beginning. The photograph doesn't erase the importance of your life. It places it in a gentler frame. Carl Sagan would later invite people to look again at the dot, to remember that everything we've ever loved and feared has unfolded there, on that speck suspended in darkness. It is not a speech meant to overwhelm you. It is a soft invitation to humility, and humility can feel like relief, because relief says, you are not required to carry the whole world tonight. The world is already floating, already moving. already held by physics and time. It is spinning under an atmosphere that blankets it like a thin, protective breath. Your job is simpler: to rest, to recover, to let your nervous system remember that it can unclench. And if you wonder why the dot is blue, there is a quiet answer. Earth's air scatters sunlight, and the shorter, bluer waves spread more easily through the atmosphere. It is the same reason our daytime sky looks blue, the same reason distant mountains can look pale and soft. Even from billions of kilometers away, that familiar scattering leaves a trace, a hint of air, of water, of home. There is another gentle detail, too. Voyager carried a golden record, a small time capsule of sounds and music, greetings and heartbeats, as if humanity wanted to send a lullaby into the dark. And then, after the family portrait, the cameras were turned off, conserving power, letting the spacecraft continue onward without the need to see anything new. It kept traveling anyway, steady and silent, like a thought released. In the next part of our drift, we'll stay with the dot a little longer. We'll explore what distance really means in space, why signals take hours, and how a single image can change the way a planet thinks about itself. For now, let the dot float behind your eyelids, small, steady, and oddly comforting, as the world slows and sleep begins to arrive. And notice how the dot sits inside a band of light, as if the sun itself is drawing a quiet curtain across the scene. The planet is so small in the frame that it's barely there, less than a pixel, a point you could cover with a pencil tip. Yet your body knows what that point contains. The weight of gravity under your feet, the salt of oceans, the warmth of rooms, the steadiness of nights like this one. So let that knowledge soothe you, not with urgency, but with tenderness. And let your breathing keep a slow rhythm, as if you too are drifting outward on a calm path. Tonight, we measure distance the way space does, not in kilometers you could drive, not in hours you could count on a clock, but in quiet, repeating steps that feel almost like breathing. Astronomers use something called an astronomical unit, the average distance between Earth and the Sun. It's a simple yardstick, a gentle one because it begins at home. 1 AU is the length of our orbit's radius, the span that sunlight crosses in a little over 8 minutes. And when Voyager 1 took its last look back, it was a little more than 40 of those units away, about 40 and a half. So far that a radio signal needed nearly 5.5 hours to cross the gap. That means something tender and strange. The pale blue dot is already a memory by the time it is seen. And still, the number itself, 40 AU, 40 and a half, doesn't need to feel cold. It's simply a way of saying far enough for perspective, far enough for gentleness. Out there, radio waves travel at the speed of light, too. A command sent from Earth does not arrive quickly, like a message on a phone. It slips away from the planet, passes the moon, crosses the orbits of Mars and Jupiter and keeps going quietly, steadily, until it reaches a small spacecraft that is itself still moving onward. By the time a response returns, much of a day can pass, and in that gap there is nothing to do but wait. Waiting in space is a kind of discipline. It is the opposite of panic. It is trust in physics, trust in planning, trust in the slow honesty of time. You can picture the spacecraft as a listener, an ear held out into the dark. It carries a high-gain antenna, like a pale dish, always trying to keep its face turned toward Earth. And on our side, there are giant antennas too, listening back, rotating slowly, catching the faintest whisper in the noise. The message is weak by the time it arrives, spread thin across billions of kilometers like a candle's warmth dispersed into a large room. Yet it is enough. Somewhere a team presses send, and then the world becomes still. That stillness is soothing to imagine, especially now, as you let your own body soften into the bed. Because your mind also sends out little signals all day, questions, worries, reminders, plans, and it expects instant replies. But tonight, we can borrow space's patience. Let your thoughts travel slowly. Let them take the long way, as if they are crossing a dark ocean. There is no urgency in the universe. There is only motion, and the quiet reassurance that it continues whether you watch it or not. As you breathe in, imagine a signal leaving you gently. And as you breathe out, imagine it arriving somewhere far away, received without judgment, simply received. And in that calm rhythm, we drift closer to the moment the camera turns and the tiny dot appears. Before the photograph could exist, there had to be a careful turning, a slow rotation of a machine that had not been built for poetry, yet somehow became part of one. Voyager's cameras were not meant to stare at the sun. Bright light could flood the optics, scatter inside the lens, and wash the image with glare. But the family portrait required looking near that brilliance because the inner planets, tiny from that distance, were clustered close to the sun's direction in the sky. So the plan was cautious, almost delicate. Warm the cameras, aim the science platform. Take a short exposure here, a longer one there. Pause. Store the data. Shift the angle by a fraction. Repeat. 60 frames, arranged like tiles, each one a small gamble against overexposure, each one a quiet promise kept. You can imagine the spacecraft turning with a grace you wouldn't expect from metal. Out there, rotation has no friction. A small nudge can set you drifting into a new orientation, and then you hold it, very still, as if balancing a glass of water on a moving train. The cameras open for a breath of time, then close again, preserving what they've caught. In that final session, Voyager 1 gathered a last family portrait of our neighborhood, a mosaic made from those frames, with 6 planets visible, some as small dots, some as pale disks, arranged across the darkness. The images of Earth were taken at 0448 GMT and about 34 minutes later, the cameras were powered down for good, saving precious energy for the long journey ahead. Before Earth's turn came, the camera had already swept across Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and the Sun's direction. One last roll call of worlds before ending with the inner lights, Jupiter, Earth, and Venus. There is something quietly humbling about that, too. Even a famous image is constrained by practical limits, power budgets, heater circuits, time on the antenna, the slow, careful accounting that keeps a spacecraft alive. And yet, within those limits, someone made room for wonder? If you picture the photograph being taken, don't imagine a flash or a shutter sound. Imagine only a brief opening of an electronic eye, far away in a cold silence, catching a faint glimmer and sealing it into memory. The dot is small because it truly is small in the frame, less than a pixel, a speck within a sunbeam, and still it is unmistakable once you know where to look. Tonight, let that be our practice as well. We don't need a big, loud revelation. We don't need life to fill the whole screen. Sometimes it's enough to notice one small point of light and to remember what it contains. In a moment, we'll drift down to earth, to the listening dishes that waited for the image to arrive, and the long patience of receiving something beautiful at the speed of light. Back on Earth, the receiving end of that long conversation looks almost like sculpture. Enormous white dishes set into deserts and hills, angled toward the sky, turning slowly as if they are following invisible music. This is the Deep Space Network, a few listening sites spaced around the planet so that as Earth rotates, at least one antenna can keep a spacecraft in view. When one horizon swallows the signal, another horizon takes it in. It is a global relay of attention, steady and quiet, like caregivers trading shifts through the night. From 40 astronomical units away, Voyager's voice is faint. By the time its radio waves reach us, they are thinner than a whisper, buried under the hiss of space and the gentle static of our own world. So the signal is treated with care. Engineers use exquisitely precise clocks, cooling systems, and careful math to pull meaning from noise. They combine data, correct errors, rebuild images line by line, as if restoring an old photograph from a few surviving fragments. If you like names, you can picture 3 places listening in turns. A dish in California's desert, one near Madrid, and one near Canberra. While one rotates out of view, another rotates in, and the work continues without interruption. Steady, patient, almost maternal. And the spacecraft itself cannot send everything at once. In 1990, it still relied on an onboard tape recorder to store camera data, and the return of the family portrait was not instantaneous. Other missions were also speaking to Earth, and antenna time had to be shared. So the images arrived over the following weeks and months, patiently, the way sleep arrives, gradually, almost without you noticing. I like to imagine a technician in a quiet room watching a screen fill with pixels, not rushing it, letting each row appear. At first, perhaps, it looks like darkness and streaks, then the faint bands of light, and finally, in the right place, a tiny dot, almost too small to deserve the attention it will receive. You can feel the tenderness of that moment, even if you've never worked in such a room, because you've felt it in other ways, waiting for a message that matters, listening for a sound in the distance, watching a horizon for a familiar light. The difference here is scale. The message is coming from billions of kilometers away, from a craft that will never return, carrying an image that no one could take from any nearer place. It is a gift delivered by patience. And perhaps that is part of why the photograph comforts us. It asks nothing from you. It does not demand productivity. It simply arrives slowly and says, "Here is your world, seen from far away." So tonight, as you sink deeper into the pillow, let yourself receive in the same way. Don't chase sleep. Don't wrestle it. Let it come, row by row, breath by breath, as gently as a distant signal resolving into meaning. When the pale blue dot was finally in human hands, it did what great images sometimes do. It became more than an image. It became a mirror. Carl Sagan looked at that tiny point and saw a lesson that could be offered without harshness. From such a distance, all our separations, our borders, our arguments, our claims of importance, collapse into one shared home, fragile and bright. He had been part of the Voyager imaging team, and for years he had gently pushed for this final look back, not because it would change the science, but because it might change the heart. He wrote about it not as a scolding, but as a soft insistence on humility, the kind that makes space inside you. He invited people to look again, to remember that everything familiar, every lullaby, every festival, every quiet grief unfolds on that speck suspended in a sunbeam. Humility, in this sense, is not smallness as shame. It is smallness as release. It is the feeling you get when you stop trying to be the center of every worry and instead become part of a larger, calmer whole. Sagan had spent his life practicing that balance. Deep scientific rigor paired with a love of wonder. He could talk about the chemistry of planets and still keep his language warm. He could argue for skepticism without turning it into cynicism. He could remind people that we are made of ordinary matter and make that ordinariness feel beautiful. If you ever watched him speak, you may remember the pace, unhurried, careful, as if he were walking alongside you rather than ahead of you. He treated curiosity like a candle you protect with your hands. He treated knowledge as something meant to be shared, not wielded. The pale blue dot became one of his most enduring symbols because it asks a question that is almost bedtime simple. If our world is that small, what is worth holding tightly, and what can be set down? Think of the things that fill a day. emails, errands, meetings, stray comments you replay, plans you never finish. From up close, they can feel like mountains. From 40 AU away, they are all happening on the same speck, under the same thin atmosphere, in the same brief slice of cosmic time. This perspective doesn't deny your feelings. It doesn't tell you not to care. It only changes the weight of caring. It lets you care with softer hands. And that's the gift we're borrowing tonight. Not the exact words, not the fame of the photo, but the quiet permission it offers. To live earnestly, but not to live clenched. So let the dot do its work on you. Let it shrink whatever has been looming. Let it widen the frame until your body believes again that it is safe to rest. In the next part of our drift, we'll return to the physical side of the story. How sunlight becomes those pale rays in the image, and why Earth holds its blue even at the edge of our solar system. For now, simply notice how the mind relaxes when the horizon expands. The world slows, and so do we. In the pale blue dot photograph, Earth isn't only small, so very small, it is also threaded through light. Those vertical rays, the soft bands that look like curtains, are sunlight scattered inside the camera system. When the lens points near the sun, stray light can bounce, reflect, and bloom into patterns. To an engineer, it is an artifact. To a sleepy mind, it can feel like a gentle stage light, as if the universe is quietly drawing attention to the dot without making it loud. And there is a calm science inside the color, too. Earth's atmosphere scatters sunlight, and shorter blue wavelengths scatter more easily. That's why our daytime sky is blue, why distant hills look washed with bluish haze, why the edge of the planet seen from space can appear as a thin, pale line. Even from billions of kilometers away, that scattering leaves a faint signature, a hint that this dot wears air like a delicate shawl. It is a thin layer, that air. If you could peel it away and hold it in your hand, it would not look like much. And yet it is everything. It moves warmth around the globe, carries clouds, cushions meteors, holds oxygen for lungs, and water vapor for rain. The photograph doesn't show those details, but your mind can. You can imagine the oceans dark and deep, the continents turning, the night side dotted with cities, the day side gleaming with cloud tops. This is one of the strange comforts of scale. It reminds you that life is both sturdy and delicate. Sturdy enough to continue through your hardest days. Delicate enough to be worth tenderness. So tonight, we practice tenderness. You don't need to be harsh with yourself to improve. You don't need to stay tense to stay responsible. Even a spacecraft crossing the dark survives by conserving energy, by doing only what is necessary, by resting its cameras when their work is done. Let your own system do the same. Conserve, release, power down the unnecessary loops. And in that same spirit, remember what Voyager carried besides instruments. A golden record, plated and protected, meant as a greeting for whatever might someday find it. It holds sounds of earth, waves and wind, footsteps and laughter, alongside music and spoken greetings in many languages. A small, brave message. We were here, and we listened, and we tried to sing. In the next stretch of our story, we'll drift closer to that record and the hands that chose what to include, not as a list, but as a quiet portrait of humanity at its gentlest. But for now, let the pale blue dot hover gently in your mind. A point of light, a breath of blue, a reminder that home is both small and enough. And as your breathing grows slower, imagine the spacecraft continuing onward, silent and steady, while you, here on the dot, begin to sleep. The golden record is easy to imagine as something grand, but it's actually modest. A round copper disc plated in gold, tucked like a small coin inside the spacecraft. It was made to endure cold and time, to ride along quietly without insisting on being found. And yet, in its quietness, it carries a tender ambition, a sampler of Earth. Picture a room where people listen carefully, not for entertainment, but for essence. What sounds represent a planet? How do you choose without turning it into a contest? The answers were practical and human. They gathered greetings spoken in many languages, not to prove anything, but to offer a simple hello. They chose music from different places and traditions because rhythm is one of the few things that can travel between beings without translation. They included the hush of wind, the rush of rain on leaves, the creak of ship timbers, the heartbeat of a human chest. The record also carries images, not as photographs printed on paper, but as signals, a set of 115 pictures encoded so that a listener with patience could rebuild them line by line. A hand, a tree, a page of diagrams, a mother and child, the shape of DNA, Earth from space, not a brag, a portrait. There are instructions, too, etched like a whisper into the cover. Diagrams meant to show how to play the record, how to find the speed, how to decode the images stored as patterns. The instructions lean on physics, on the steadiness of fundamental ideas, because physics is the closest thing we have to a shared language with the universe. Carl Sagan helped lead the effort, not as a showman, but as a translator between worlds, the world of engineers and budgets and the world of human meaning. He understood that this disc was not likely to be heard, not in any near future, perhaps not ever. But that wasn't the point. The point was the gesture. The point was to take ourselves seriously enough to speak, and lightly enough to accept that the cosmos may never answer. There's something deeply SleepWise about that. A message set adrift without expectation, a gift offered with open hands. Tonight, imagine the record's faint companionship out there, riding in darkness while our pale dot keeps turning. The record is a reminder that we are a storytelling species. Even when we don't know who is listening, we leave notes in bottles. And perhaps sleep is a little like that, too. You lie down, you close your eyes, and you send a quiet message into the dark. I'm ready to let go. I'm ready to be carried for a while. So let your breathing continue, slow and even, as we drift from the golden record back to the people who made the spacecraft possible. Thousands of hands and minds, each doing something small, each contributing to a journey no single person could take alone. If you widen your view even a little, you can see Voyager not as one mission, but as a tapestry of quiet work. There were designers who chose metals that could handle cold, engineers who tested circuits again and again, navigators who learned how to borrow speed from Jupiter and Saturn without being thrown off course, technicians who tightened bolts, wrote checklists, labeled wires. There were mathematicians who treated gravity like a patient partner, and radio specialists who learned how to hear a spacecraft's whisper under the constant hum of space. And there were moments, too, when the human side peeked through the technical. A small decision to include a photograph, a careful debate about what to preserve on a golden disk, a late-night meeting where someone says, gently, we should take one last look back. Carl Sagan moved through that world as a bridge. He was a planetary scientist, but also a public voice, someone who believed that science should belong to everyone. Long before he was famous, he was simply a curious child who loved libraries and museum halls, the kind of places where you can sit quietly and let questions stretch out in your mind. That early tenderness toward learning stayed with him. He liked metaphors that made scale feel friendly. One of his most famous is the cosmic calendar, the idea of compressing the history of the universe into a single year so the mind can feel it without strain. In that calendar, the universe begins on January 1st. Galaxies gather and reorganize through the months. Our sun and earth arrive late in the year, and life takes its time. Slow oceans, slow chemistry, slow evolution, patient as tides. And then, only near the end of December, the whole sweep of recorded human history arrives in the final seconds. Languages, cities, science, music, like a late spark at the edge of the year. And then it's gone again. It's not meant to minimize you. It's meant to soften you. To say, you are part of a story that is larger than any one day, and that largeness can be comforting. When you remember that, your own worries tend to loosen a little, the way a tight knot loosens when you stop pulling. So tonight, if your mind has been tight around a single problem, imagine placing it onto that calendar. Watch it shrink, not into nothing, but into perspective. It becomes one small note in the margin, not the whole page. And as you rest, remember the most soothing truth in all of this. The universe is not in a hurry. Stars burn for billions of years. Orbits repeat with patient accuracy. Even a spacecraft leaving home takes decades to reach the edge of our neighborhood. Let your body borrow that patience now. Let sleep come on its own schedule, like winter arriving quietly, like a planet completing its turn. There is a quiet skill in what Sagan did so well. He taught people how to feel wonder without losing their footing. Wonder can sometimes tip into dizziness, especially at night, when the mind is sensitive. But Sagan's kind of wonder was grounded. He would give you a fact, then a frame, then a gentle handrail of meaning. He didn't ask you to be awed into silence. He asked you to be curious into calmness. One of his steady messages was that science is not a set of cold answers. It is a method of care, a way of checking, of testing, of admitting uncertainty without panic. He loved the idea that being wrong is not a humiliation, but a step toward being less wrong. A soft correction, like adjusting a pillow until it supports your neck. In 1980, that philosophy reached millions through Cosmos, both a book and a television series, where he walked viewers through galaxies and atoms with the same steady pace. He spoke as if the universe were a home you could explore, and he never treated the audience as outsiders. He made room for wonder and then made room for understanding. That attitude mattered in public life. When he spoke about big risks like nuclear weapons or the fragility of Earth's environment, he tried to do it without hysteria. He argued that if we can understand consequences, we can choose differently. Knowledge, for him, was not just power. It was responsibility. And the pale blue dot fits into that gentle responsibility. It doesn't say, nothing matters. It says, what matters is rare. Earth's habitability is a delicate balance. The right distance from the sun, liquid water, an atmosphere that holds warmth but not too much, a magnetic field that helps shield us from harsh particles. These are quiet facts, but you can feel their tenderness. They mean that your breath is not guaranteed by the universe. It is a gift of conditions maintained by physics and time. So the pale blue dot becomes an invitation to care for home, not with panic, but with steadiness, the kind of care you can sustain. Tonight, let that steadiness touch you personally. Caring for yourself is also a form of planetary care because you are part of the dot. Your nervous system is a small ecology. It needs rest the way forests need rain. It needs calm the way oceans need tides. So, if you notice your thoughts racing, don't scold them. Treat them the way a scientist treats an unruly signal. Observe, adjust, try again, gently. Bring your attention back to your breath, to the weight of the blanket, to the coolness of air at the tip of your nose. Out beyond the planets, Voyager continues to glide, and its camera remains dark now, powered down since that final portrait. But the meaning of the photograph stays awake in us, like a small nightlight. In the next part of our drift, we'll drift outward again, toward the boundary where the sun's influence thins, and where Voyager becomes less a visitor of planets and more a traveler between stars. As Voyager moved farther and farther from home, the solar system changed character. Inside the orbits of the planets, sunlight feels direct, almost personal. Beyond the last giant worlds, it becomes quieter, more diffuse, and the space between things begins to dominate the scene. There is a boundary out there that isn't a wall, but a gradual transition, a place where the steady stream of particles from the sun, the solar wind, slows, bends, and meets the thin pressure of the interstellar medium. Scientists call the sun's broad bubble of influence the heliosphere, and the outer edge of that bubble the heliopause. It's not something you would see with your eyes. It's something you infer from instruments, from changes in particle counts and magnetic fields, from the way the space around the spacecraft begins to feel different. Voyager would eventually cross that frontier, entering what scientists describe as interstellar space, still connected to the sun by radio waves, but traveling in a region shaped more by the galaxy than by our star. Even that crossing was gentle. No fireworks, no sudden music. Just a series of readings that quietly said, the environment has changed. For Voyager 1, those readings arrived in 2012, and the meaning settled in gradually, the way dawn settles into a room. And there's a soothing lesson hidden there. Big transitions are often quiet. We imagine milestones as loud and obvious, but many of the most important shifts in life happen gradually. The first night you sleep better after a difficult month. The slow return of appetite after stress. The way a new habit becomes normal without a single dramatic moment. Tonight, sleep is one of those gentle frontiers. You don't cross it with force. You drift across it like a spacecraft coasting into a new region, guided by physics, guided by fatigue, guided by the body's quiet wisdom. Sagan loved to remind people that we are star stuff, made from atoms forged in ancient stars. It's a poetic phrase, but it is also a scientific one. The heavier elements in your bones and blood were built in stellar interiors long before Earth existed. The universe learned to make carbon and oxygen, iron and calcium, and eventually those elements became oceans, rocks, trees, and you. From the pale blue dot perspective, that lineage feels comforting rather than strange. You belong to the universe, not as an outsider looking in, but as a continuation of its own chemistry. So let yourself belong tonight. Let your body be heavy, the way a planet is heavy, stable in its orbit. Let your thoughts be like small satellites, circling without needing to land. Let them pass and return to the steadiness of breath. In a moment, we'll come back to the dot one more time, not to repeat it, but to deepen it. How perspective can become a daily practice, the way Sagan hoped it would, a quiet habit of humility that makes room for kindness. There is a way to carry the pale blue dot with you without turning it into a lecture. You don't need to recite distances or remember dates. You only need the feeling of the frame widening. When something sharp happens in your day, an email that stings, a misunderstanding, a plan that shifts, you can picture the dot and you can ask softly, is this worth tightening my whole body for? Sometimes the answer will still be yes, because your life matters. But even then, the dot can change how you hold it. It can make your grip gentler, your breath slower, your mind less eager to spiral. Sagan's gift was not only in his discoveries, but in his insistence that perspective is a moral tool. The more you understand the world, the harder it is to hate strangers. The more you see Earth as a shared home, the more absurd cruelty begins to feel. This is not naive optimism. It is a quiet argument for decency built on scale. In his later writing, he returned again and again to the idea that clear thinking can be tender. Skepticism for him wasn't a sneer. It was a lantern, a way to protect ourselves from fear and rumor, and to keep the mind honest without making it hard. And the photograph itself is a practice in decency. It reminds us that no one else is coming to save our home, that the thin atmosphere and the oceans and the forests are ours to protect, because this dot is all we have, at least for now. And that responsibility can feel heavy until you pair it with humility, and then it becomes steadier, more doable, less frantic. Tonight, though, you don't need to carry responsibility in your hands. You can set it down beside the bed like a folded coat. Rest is not abandonment. Rest is maintenance. A tired mind makes narrower frames. A rested mind can widen them again. So imagine the spacecraft continuing on, its antenna still turned toward us, its power dwindling slowly over the years, its signal growing fainter. It does not hurry. It does not regret. It simply travels, carrying a record, carrying a memory, carrying one last photograph of home. And on Earth, nights keep arriving. Curtains are drawn. Lamps click off. People settle into pillows. The dot, so small in the picture, is full of bedrooms like yours, full of quiet breaths and soft exhalations. Let your breath join that planet-wide rhythm, in and out, slow enough that your thoughts begin to blur at the edges. If a worry tries to stand up, let it sit back down. If a memory knocks, let it pass by like footsteps in a hallway. The universe is wide, and it has room for your rest. In the next part of our drift, we'll step gently from Sagan's perspective into the broader idea he loved most, that learning can be a kind of comfort, and that curiosity at its best is not a restless hunger, but a warm, steady light you can fall asleep beside. Learning, at its gentlest, is not a sprint for answers. It is a way of settling into the world, the way you settle into a chair that fits you well. Carl Sagan understood that most people don't resist science because they dislike truth. They resist it because it can feel like a locked room, full of unfamiliar tools and cold light. So he learned how to open the door softly. He would begin with something you already knew. A sunset, a grain of sand, the feeling of looking up on a clear night. And then he would take one careful step outward, letting your mind adjust as if it were stepping from a bright hallway into a dim, peaceful library. He treated the universe like a place you could belong in, not because you were an expert, but because you were a human with senses and curiosity. He didn't ask you to memorize. He asked you to notice. Notice how light behaves. Notice how seasons repeat. Notice how a planet can be both a physical object and a home. And notice, too, how the act of noticing slows the heart. This is one reason the pale blue dot feels like a bedtime image. It is not loud. It does not demand a reaction. It simply widens the frame until your nervous system remembers that it can unclench. In a widened frame, small things remain real, but they stop feeling like emergencies. If you imagine Sagan at a desk, you might picture him late at night, reading, writing, shaping sentences the way a careful person shapes a fire, building warmth without sparks. He spent years teaching, years doing research, years speaking to the public, and through it all, he kept returning to the same quiet point. The world is knowable, and knowing it can make you kinder. Tonight, we borrow that kindness. We don't have to master anything. We can simply let a few gentle facts sit beside us like stones warmed by sunlight. A spacecraft once turned back toward home. It captured a dot. It reminded us that scale can be comfort. And now, in your room, with the lights low, you can let that comfort become practical. Let it loosen your forehead. Let it soften your shoulders. Let it slow the small muscles in your hands. If a thought arrives that feels too large, place it gently in the widened frame. Imagine it from far away, not to dismiss it, but to hold it more lightly. You are allowed to sleep without solving everything first. The world can wait. The universe has practiced waiting for a long time. And in the quiet that follows, your breathing becomes the simplest lesson of all, the steady, repeating, and enough. There is a particular calm in the way science corrects itself, not with sudden certainty, but with patient refinement. Sagan often spoke about this as if it were a moral skill, the ability to say, I might be wrong, and to feel no shame in adjusting course. In daily life, we can treat being wrong like a threat. We tighten, we defend, we rehearse our arguments in our heads. But the scientific habit is different. It says, look again, measure again, try another explanation, let reality have the final word. That habit is soothing because it turns the mind away from drama and toward curiosity. Imagine a candle in a dark room. It doesn't fill the space all at once. It doesn't pretend the darkness is gone. It simply gives you enough light for the next step. Sagan's voice, at its best, was like that. Enough light to move forward without fear. And perhaps that is what you need tonight. Not a blaze of insight, but a small, steady glow. So we take the next step gently. We remember that Voyager's cameras were turned off after the family portrait, not because the journey ended, but because energy matters on long trips. The spacecraft kept traveling, and it still sent signals for years, using what it had carefully. It is the quiet model of restraint, to do what is necessary, then to rest. Your mind can do the same. You have spent the day taking in signals, messages, tasks, impressions, decisions. Your inner antenna has been working hard. Now it can power down the parts that don't need to run through the night. You can turn off the bright camera of worry. You can let the deeper instruments keep doing their quiet maintenance. Digestion, healing, memory sorting, the gentle housekeeping of sleep. If you notice that you're still holding on to the day, imagine placing it onto a tape recorder like the one Voyager used, storing it safely, not erasing it, just setting it aside. It will be there in the morning if it truly matters. Tonight does not require you to rewatch it. Let the bed support you the way gravity supports the dot. Let your breath be the slow signal you send yourself. A simple message repeated until it becomes comforting. In and out. In and out. And if your thoughts wander outward again into the vastness, let them. Vastness is not a threat. Vastness is a blanket, wide enough to cover everything, including you. Somewhere far away, a small spacecraft continues, and here, on the dot, you are allowed to drift. The world slows, and so do you. When we speak about Carl Sagan's legacy, we don't need to make it grand. It is already quiet and durable, like a well-built bridge. He left behind books and lectures and the memory of a calm face, inviting people to look up. He helped shape the way many people imagine the cosmos, not as a cold abyss, but as a place of breathtaking order and strange beauty. He helped make the language of planets feel less like a secret code and more like a shared story. And perhaps most importantly, he modeled a tone, a way of speaking that does not hurry the listener, a way of explaining that respects the mind without intimidating it, a way of being serious without being harsh. There is a tenderness in that, especially now, when so much public speech is sharp. It's easy to forget how rare it is to meet someone who can hold both skepticism and wonder in the same hands. Skepticism without wonder turns into dryness. Wonder without skepticism turns into fog. But together they make a clear night, stars visible, air steady, the horizon calm. Sagan lived in that clear night. He wanted people to understand how easily we can fool ourselves and how precious it is to have tools that help us check our beliefs. But he never wanted that checking to make us cynical. He wanted it to make us safer, kinder, more capable of cooperating on a fragile world. You can feel how the pale blue dot fits into that goal. It doesn't ask you to worship space. It asks you to care for home. It asks you to see that the arguments that feel so large up close are happening on a small stage. And when the stage is small, cruelty looks less impressive and kindness looks more logical. Tonight, you don't have to carry the whole legacy. You only have to carry one small piece of it, the permission to widen your frame. If you're someone who thinks for a living, who plans, who forecasts, who tries to control outcomes, this permission can feel unfamiliar, but it is not irresponsibility. It is maintenance. Even the best instruments need quiet time. So let your mind be an instrument at rest. Let it cool. Let it settle into zero. Let the day's static fade the way a distant radio signal fades into clean silence when the receiver is turned down. And in that silence, imagine Sagan's most gentle suggestion hovering like a soft lamp. Look again. Look carefully. And then, when you've looked, allow yourself to sleep. There will be time for understanding tomorrow. Tonight is for drifting. Now we return slowly from the edge of the solar system, not by racing back, but by letting the image of home grow warmer in your mind. Picture the dot again, not as a fact, but as a feeling. A small blue breath held in darkness. A world wrapped in a thin atmosphere, moving through space as naturally as you move through a dream. From far away, there is no sound, no headlines, no harsh voices, only the quiet reality of a planet turning. From here, in your room, you can hear little sounds, the soft shift of fabric, perhaps the hush of air conditioning, the distant life of a building settling. These are your local universe sounds. They are small, consistent, and safe. Let them be the soundtrack of your landing. Your body already knows how to land. It does it every night, if you let it. Muscles loosen. Breathing deepens. Thoughts become less coherent, more like shapes than sentences. The brain begins its careful work of sorting, pruning, strengthening, releasing. If you feel yourself still gripping, try a simple gesture. On an exhale, imagine you are opening your hand, not pushing anything away, just releasing the need to hold it tightly. Then inhale gently, as if you are taking in cool air from a window cracked open in winter. Exhale again and open the hand again. There is no need to be perfect at this. A little release is enough. A little softness is enough. Sleep does not require mastery. And as you soften, notice how perspective changes the taste of worry. A worry up close can feel sharp and immediate. From a widened frame, it becomes information, something you can address later when you're rested. You don't have to erase your problems tonight. You only have to stop wrestling them in the dark. Out there, Voyager continues, its message growing fainter year by year, and yet the pale blue dot remains bright in our minds because it points to something simple, that home is shared, that time is precious, and that rest is part of caring. So let rest be your contribution tonight. Let it be your quiet act of stewardship. In a moment, we'll let the story fade the way the spacecraft fades, into stillness, into distance, into a soft dark where nothing demands you. For now, breathe, and let the bed hold you as reliably as gravity holds the dot. And now we let the image becomes smaller, not because it matters less, but because you no longer need to stare at it. Imagine the pale blue dot drifting farther away until it becomes a point and then a hint, and then only the memory of a point. The sunbeam softens, the darkness deepens, the frame widens until there is nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove, nothing left to chase. There is only motion, steady and quiet. In that widened frame, your life remains real and your efforts remain meaningful, but the urgency loosens. You can care without clenching. You can be serious without being tense. You can belong to a vast universe and still let your own small body rest on a pillow, safe on a turning planet. Tonight, you have traveled far, through distance, through patience, through a photograph taken at the edge of our neighborhood, and you have returned to the simplest place, your breath, your bed, the gentle weight of a blanket. If thoughts still come, let them come like distant stars, present but not demanding. If a memory flickers, let it flicker and fade. If a worry rises, place it gently into the widened frame and watch it become smaller, softer, easier to hold tomorrow. Your only job now is to drift. The world slows, and so do you. The room quiet, the body heavy, the mind unfastening, like a knot that finally gives way. Out beyond the planets, a small traveler continues in silence, and here on Earth, on this pale blue dot, you are allowed to sleep. Good night.